The Marino Show.
Hey everybody, welcome to the Marino Show. I'm your host, David Marino, and I'm welcoming back John Isberg. He is the writer, director, producer, cinematographer of Final Summer, a horror film that is now streaming. I had talked to John a few months ago when the film was still being screened at various theaters around the country. So, John, thank you so much for coming back to the show. I'm excited to have you again.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Yeah.
How does it feel like seeing the film like streaming now? I mean, I've watched your social media. I know that was exciting.
Yeah, it's so crazy because it's such a weird thing. I remember sometimes I'll watch movies on my TV upstairs and I'll kind of live stream some of the funny slasher films I've seen, or check out this. I never realized that this guy was in this film. And so it's funny to now have like my film in the same kind of image I've shared. It's such a surreal thing. I mean, I think that in a million years, you just never think your film is going to get anywhere or be anywhere. And then it goes to a drive-in, and that's strange. And then you go to a theater, and then you go to a festival, and then now you're where everybody can consume it on their TV or, on their iPhone or whatever. So it's completely bizarre.
I know. I remember just talking to you a few months ago and watching the film. You had sent it to me. So again, thank you for that. I loved it because I love the atmosphere that you created with the cinematography, the music, all throwbacks to the slasher genre. However, it's current. It's a current film. I love it. Tell me, what the experience has been like, kind of, seeing it get exposed to more and more people, because with that comes, more opinions, etc. Before we get into that, though, tell those who haven't seen the film just a little synopsis of what Final Summer is about.
Sure. Final Summer is a throwback slasher to the summer camp slasher movies of the early 80s that I loved. And I kind of grew up in a lot of those slasher films. It's got Tom Matthews from Friday the 13th Part 6, Jason Lives, and Return of the Living Dead is in the film, as well as Bishop Stevens, who was in A24's Slice with Joe Keery, Chance the Rapper, and Zazie Beetz, and Walking Dead. He was in Shudder's original Revealer by Luke Boyce as well. And it's in some ways, I think from a personal side, I think that the film is as much a tribute to the summer camp slashers and the slashers films that I grew up with, but also, and more personally to me, it's a tribute to being a survivor, to the final girl character of these slasher films. So yeah, I'm still working on that. the pitch thing. Just kidding.
Well, you did a great job. And like I said, I've been following your social media since we talked, and I've seen that you had various screenings at festivals and theaters, which was really cool. Now that it's out in the world in terms of the streaming world, with that, like I mentioned earlier, comes more conversation, more opinions. Yeah. What have you found to be the most interesting part of that process?
Sure. Well, one thing I think is it really kind of reinforces a couple of things, actually, which is fun. We just talked about it before, is that slasher films are like the most critically maligned of all of the horror genres. So I remember reading some reviews of a lot of the Friday the 13th films that had almost the exact same criticisms of our film. So it's kind of funny in a way. And then in other ways, I think... I look at even more so now, like films as, even with the slasher film, it's kind of a work of art because it's such a subjective point of view to how people perceive it. So some people love the same thing that this person hates about the film. Like they'll love and hate the same exact thing, and so it's just so fascinating to me how it can just be perceived in completely different ways. And then also, I think that there's interesting. One of the things that we talked about from the beginning when we were making the film was that there were choices that we were going to make that might be hard for some people to really see, and a lot of it because of the personal nature of the film for me with dealing with gaslighting that I went through, and I want to put a lot of that in there with dealing with sociopaths, talking about PTSD. I think those concepts can be difficult. I mean, I spent 4 years teaching kids with the emotional disabilities, and only really after the fact did I really understand even more so about trauma. And then for me, I think it took 8 years for me to really understand more about my own PTSD. And then with my dad growing up, he was a paramedic for 35 years in the 80s. I think now in the last couple of years, we start to talk more about his PTSD. So I think there's a lot of concepts in the film that can be difficult for audiences to grasp. And that was something I was like, I kind of felt like sometimes I'm like, am I too close to these themes where it might be hard for some people to really understand? Because I was talking to someone about Silence of the Lambs recently. And Silence of the Lambs is interesting because you've got Hannibal Lecter, who is like always like the epitome of what people would hold up as like, oh, he's the psychopath and all this kind of stuff. But the thing about that I noticed when I was watching recently is the film is telling you the entire time what he is. So before you ever even meet him, Dr. Chilton is like, oh, he's a psychopath and he ain't this guy and his heart never skipped a beat and all this kind of stuff. And then you meet him in the context of what you have already been told. And then he's telling you who Buffalo Bill is. So as an audience who hasn't had any of those experiences, you are kind of like, oh, okay. And I think with a film like ours, it doesn't necessarily do that. And so I think that's might be sometimes where people like, I think more to the point of what I'm trying to say is that I feel like what I've noticed in people is that the tropes of slasher films can be a hurdle to looking at a film in its own way, And I've noticed that in some reviews are so funny because like they'll be like, it's like I'm literally reading this review where it's talking about almost like this person has a checklist of what a slasher film is. And it's like, well, a slasher film is this, and a slasher film is that, and the killer should be big and bulky, and they should be like doing all these things, and the villain should tell you the monologue at the end of the film. And I'm like, but it's funny to me because it's a lot of those things that are telling me what it is are things that we kind of knew from the beginning we didn't want to do, And to go to my personal experience, the villain doesn't tell you the monologue at the end of the film. They are still gaslighting you. The killer does not need to be big and bulky. I kind of laugh because I was like, the most scary movie of all time has an 11-year-old girl in it. So I mean, Exorcist, what I mean? So it's kind of funny. So I guess to me, it was just really fascinating to see one, like how we perceive these films is a very rigid way, and if it doesn't do that, it's like we'll interpret them as like, well, obviously this sucks because it didn't do what I was thinking it was going to do. And so I think in some ways I'm like, well, this gives me hope because maybe we could be a cult film at some point, where where people will revisit it and be like, oh, okay, I see what you're going. Just spitballing here, of course, but yeah.
I love the point you're making because it's funny that the film by some critics is being criticized for not being like the cookie cutter slasher flick. But then had it been the cookie cutter slasher flick, we would have criticized it for being a slasher flick. So, I mean, you can't really win. So I've always said I don't trust a lot of critics when it comes to horror films because you and I both have a similar taste in the slasher genre, but I like that you've sort of taken it and kind of turned it upside down a little bit.
Yeah.
And in speaking of that, I know that last time we talked, and I even read on your social media that you're gearing up to do a teaser trailer for Final Summer 2, which will answer some of the questions, hopefully, from part 1. So tell me about that and where you are in that process.
Yeah, we've been working on actually right before I met you, I was meeting with one of the guys who's going to be the sound designer on the film. And we were talking a lot about the world of it and kind of things I want to do with it. Because on the first one, I kind of wore a lot of the hats. And so I did a lot of the sound design on the film. I did a lot of the music for it. And one of the things I kind of thought about was, does a scene always need music? Can you have like, like this, the atmosphere alone could be something. Like I was watching Edge of the Axe recently, and I was sharing the opening sequence, and it's kind of when they go into the car wash, and it's interesting how it's kind of quiet and it's just mundane noise. And when nothing happens in a horror film like that, it's like it kind of amps up your tension because you're waiting for the thing and you're wondering why nothing's happening. But I think sometimes, and then the music would come in and it kind of cues you into like, oh, here comes something. I'm getting a little bit off subject here, but like basically we were talking a lot about the world of that and how we wanted to shape it a bit more. So not just have music, but also the sound design be much more immersive. But yeah, we're working on the story right now. I've started to cast it already. I've got actually three kind of like familiar horror actors coming back, from the Friday series. So I'm excited for that. So Tom Matthews is coming back in a bigger role this time. And then also there's two other people that I'll probably announce as we launch our Indiegogo. But I think one of the things that I'm really excited for this one is the first one, the theme is fight or flight. And the second one really has so much more to do with that stage when you get away from the gaslighting and stuff. And now you're trying to sort out what is real and what is true and what is false and a lie and all these kinds of things. So I think it'll be interesting. Basically, the film takes place in 1993. It takes place about a week before Halloween, of course. But I think within that week time frame, so it's within the music scene of a local college town, which I'm basing a lot of on the music scene of Champaign-Urbana, because it was such an important part of like alternative music at the time and college music. We had bands like Poster Children and Hum, and then Braid came much later, but it was a really important scene. And a lot of like, major labels came here to scout bands because it was right after Nirvana's Nevermind came out. This was like going to be the next Seattle. And I graduated high school in 94. And that was like my whole world, was going to record stores, going to shows, playing in bands. And I felt like the thing with the camp counselors is I don't really know a camp counselor. I've never been one, but I've been a musician. I played in bands. And so when I think about kind of the depth that we can go to, and the second one with the characters, that's exciting because I think about now you have characters who have like, passions for something. They're active, they're not just reacting to something, they're bandmates that annoy the crap out of each other, but also would love each other and fight to the death for each other. So I think, and I'm just excited for it because I feel like the story is stronger. And again, I feel like you learn a lot from your first film and you learn all the mistakes that you don't want to make again. So you can hopefully make new mistakes or whatever. And to go to 93, I would say that there is that angst in the air. There's that alternative. There's that so-called grunge or whatever. It's that Gen X kind of thing where we're starting to come of age and being 18 and listening to Nine Inch Nails and Alice in Chains and going to shows and smoking whatever those clove cigarettes and all that, and reading the Sandman magazines, and somewhere down the road like The Crow is going to come out. All like all these kinds of things. So like Nine Inch Nails, industrial. So I think it's in a fun way. It's like a darker, more moodier, more atmospheric, but also I'm excited because I feel like I've learned like I want to have this film stand on its own. I don't want to be like, oh, it's a ripoff of X, Y, and Z. So I think that's where these things can really, just personalize it a bit more. Not to talk your ear off about this, but yeah.
Well, no, that's why you're here. I love hearing you talk about the film. I think it's great. And I graduated in 94 as well from high school. So I like that whole vibe. I think that does lend itself to, just the grunge and the angst that lends itself perfectly to a horror movie, let alone a sequel. So
well, it's funny. I just talked to like Adam Marcus, who directed Jason Goes to Hell, because I wanted to throw some references into that movie in our film because that came out the fall of 93. And he's like, oh yeah, cool. And he gave me some really nice kind of insights into how to deal with, like make the film you want it to make. Don't worry so much about what the critics or the audience think, that kind of thing. And so he was really nice too. So it's exciting in that way to still have some Easter eggs that kind of pay homage to the past, but to kind of make it more of your own thing. And I already, like, like the set pieces, I'm really excited for. I would just say, like, in terms of touchstones for our film, it'd be like Seven is a big one. Obviously, Scream, Empire Records, Decline of Western Civilization, and probably a little bit of High Fidelity in a way too, if you've seen that one. So
Yeah, I have, and I love Empire Records.
oh
Such
yeah, yeah. So it's one of my friends has. I was working on a music documentary for a long time about the Champagne music scene, and so I met so many musicians through that who were in that from that era, and they all have, like, I've got so much, like, artifacts from that time, like flyers and T-shirts, and then one of the guys who used to own a record store, record service that was on campus, like, he has all that stuff, and so one of my friends owns a record store called Exile on Main Street, and so we're basically just taking over my friend's record store, turning it back into record service. And then Campus Town's changed a bit. So for the downtown Urbana, we're kind of turning it into like 1993. So there's this old theater that used to exist called the Princess Theater that Roger Ebert used to go to all the time. And we're kind of fronting that one with the marquee. And then there's some, one of the Friday characters is going to be really funny because he's playing like this, like the worst sound guy ever. But anyway, these are all like details, but I feel like there's a lot of mystery. We learn more about kind of the events of the first one. And then and to go to Halloween Ends, I know like people had a big problem with that one because Corey Cunningham comes out of nowhere. And so I remember thinking about that and thinking like, okay. And so actually it was kind of great that the first one, just by complete sheer luck, ends up setting up the second one in a really nice way. So I think like when you get through the second one, it's going to make you look at the first one in a completely different kind of way. So I'm kind of excited about that. But no, I'm really excited. I think that the when people see the teaser trailer, I think they'll get the direction that we're going for, and they'll see that there's something that's not just a ripoff of whatever else, So I'm excited for that. But they'll probably find a way to call it a ripoff of something else anyway. So
Well, who cares? I love the Friday the 13th franchise. So the fact that Tom Matthews was in, Final Summer is awesome. And then hearing that you're bringing some other actors that you'll name later to the film just makes me even more happy. I watched Friday the 13th Part 6 again for the first time in several years the other day because they're all streaming right now on HBO Max.
Yeah.
And I remembered, like, it's such a good entry in the franchise because, I mean, kind of getting off topic, but I bring it up because of Tom.
Yeah.
Like, it really, the camera work, everything, it really did something different in the franchise at that point. After Part 5, I know people were not as happy with that sequel, but Part 6 had the tongue-in-cheek kind of humor, and it had just the whole vibe and the way it was shot. It was so smart, and his character was just awesome. So I'm glad that you were able to get him in the film. So now that you've gone to a number of I've seen you at different cons, on social, at different festivals. What has it been like being able to touch base with either actors or directors and just kind of get insight from their point of view on what they did with their films, and also kind of helping you moving forward in what, even after Final Summer?
Oh yeah, I think no, it's been great because I think I've definitely built up a really nice friendship and network with other indie horror filmmakers. Some that were in Terrifier 2, and have other ones that are coming up in Mutilator 2 and all that. It's like Eva Hamilton and Ryan James and some other people, and so it's just been great. I think it's been really nice to not feel alone in all of this, because this is it can be so overwhelming and isolating. And I think a lot of times, with our film, it's like everybody you go through the production phase, which is insane, pressure cooker, like 13 days or so, and then you're editing. But you everybody kind of goes off and does their thing while you're still with this film for, a year or two after the fact. And so it's nice to have a network of friends who have been through it too. It just makes you feel less alone. And So I think I've kind of built a really good network of friends who we can all laugh at this insanity, of, like, don't read the reviews, don't read the comments, don't even think about Letterbox, all this other stuff. And then, but then also to talk about, like, what was it like to work with this actor? Or what do you think about that? And so that's been helpful to think about how to approach certain people. It's just all that kind of stuff. I think it's just been great. And I think the people that I've become friends with are really supportive, and I love to be supportive of their films too. And so it's really wonderful. And then to go to the cons, I think just talking to a lot of the horror fans, it's been fun. Because I never went to horror cons before we made the movie. And that's been really informative too, to see and to listen to feedback about what people want to see. Like they want to see more blood or creative kills or whatever, or what they like about the film, what they didn't like about the film. And again, just like when I was always recutting the film after every film festival, it's like listening to this for the future. Like, what are the stumbling blocks that people had a hard time with, and how can I kind of work on that for the future? So it's been fun. Yeah.
So after you wrap Final Summer 2, once you get that started, it'll probably be similar to what you've done with this film, with the festival circuit, etc. But after that, do you already have, like, a thought of what you want to pursue in
Oh yeah.
your filmmaking?
Yeah, I've got a couple other films, because I don't know, because I did love horror, but I love a lot of other films too. And some of my favorite directors are, like Gus Van Sant, who did like My Own Private Idaho, and yeah, I think films like that mean a lot to me. I love Paris, Texas, Wim Wenders' film that Robbie Mueller shot. So I've got a couple of film ideas. One about a drive-in, like on the last night of its operation, and that's like a family-owned one. And I was just thinking about, legacies, like family legacy, our relationship with film, and yeah, a lot of movies, a lot of films about movies or movie theaters are always kind of from this, like, the beautiful palace, and the architecture of the place and all this stuff. But I think, to me, the fascinating, because I'm much more blue collar, I always find it interesting that it's like, here's this parking lot at the edge of town with a billboard. And in that space, there's all these stories of that town and all these memories and stuff like that. So that's a film that I'm really interested in, because when we played at the drive-in, I was just struck by, one, that we're playing at a drive-in, but also kind of the cultural. It's just an interesting culture around it. Like, there was a documentary about the Mahoning drive-in. I don't know if you saw that one out in the one that's in Mahoning, Pennsylvania. It's kind of similar. They're trying to do like they didn't have enough money to do like the digital conversion, so they were trying to keep like 35 millimeter alive. And so I think, there's a couple of films like that I'm interested in, more of this, like, small town kind of, dead end kind of stories that I really like a lot, which are completely uncommercial. so, so, so it's like there's no, like, drama, disgusting, like, zine or something like that or whatever out there. So that's the thing about horror that's great, is there is an infrastructure that supports it. Whereas when you go to that, it's like, well, now I got to get a name actor. We got to do well at a festival to even have a chance of getting anything. So anyway, yeah.
In terms of, working in the indie world, do you ever have aspirations or think about wanting to work, like, in some big budget Hollywood film? I mean, what goes through your mind when you think about it? I ask that only because, I'm always often curious. I think a lot of, at least the indie filmmakers I've spoken to, yourself as well, they really do like the creative freedom that comes with having all the control, even though with all of that comes a lot more stress in terms of finance, right, and all of that stuff. So I'm curious, would you ever want to be a part of something like that, or is that just, like, not something you want
I
to do?
think it would depend. I saw a image yesterday of behind the scenes shot from this movie called Call of the Wild with Harrison Ford, and it was like a scene where, like, this guy is like running off on the ice, and it just was like, it was the surface that he was on. It was all blue screen, and it just looked like the most boring thing in the world to shoot. I love natural light. I love being on location a lot. So I think I get a lot of inspiration from being on set on a location versus being in the green screen or out in LA. They've got the thing called the volume, which is probably a little bit more cool because now you can actually see, like in the Batman, how they shot in the volume, and it was, they could have the sunset going for like 8 hours while they were shooting this thing. Which is weird if you ever done that before. I was on this movie called Black Mold, and it was at this interior set. It's making the rounds now. It's playing at Film Quest, and it was at Fright Fest UK. But we were doing this bathroom scene for like, I felt like 4 hours or whatever, right? And it was, but the lighting in the room was always like, it felt like sunrise, and so it's the weirdest thing to walk out. Anyway, I'm getting off track here, but sorry. But I think I just love indie film a lot. I love knowing the crew. A friend of mine that lives like 2 blocks or 2 doors down from me, this guy Daniel Clark. He shot the short film Laura Can't Sleep, or Laura's Having Trouble Sleeping, the one that became Smile. And he was telling me about he loves indie, like he shot like $5 to $10 million films, but he loves the indie films because it's still about the creative problem solving. It's not like he'll be like, maybe we could get like some 18Ks here and a couple condors, and then it just shows up, and he's like, well, that was simple, versus the problem solving of trying to do these things. I kind of love, so I just love the crew.
I love the video you shared the other day of doing the sound for the film with the grass and kind of moving your hands in the grass to make the noise of the footsteps. I mean, that was a perfect way to capture what it's like to work in indie film, at least for me, not being in it. I was like, wow, that's really, really, you don't often think about those things when you're watching a movie. You just take that for granted if you're the viewer. So I thought that was really, I thought it was interesting and awesome that you shared the behind the scenes of really how it all comes together, and it's not glamorous per se.
Right. Well, I think it's all well, it's always like the two things I always joke about is the story of film is like, you don't know what you don't know, which is everything. And then it's all just problem solving, and there's a lot of like Facebook groups for indie filmmaking, and I feel like every day someone asks that $50,000 question, which is like, how do I get $50,000 or whatever for my film? Or I've got an idea. Is there a producer who will see the genius of that and throw $1 million at me? Like, that just never ever happens. And if that happens, watch out, because they're going to rip you off. When there's no money, you have to be creative, and that was our story.